Expression control effects are an infrequently used and misunderstood feature inside After Effects, but I'm here to tell you that they are a valuable tool, and I want to show you how to use them. So go to Working Files and open up After Effects Projects and go down to 1504 Expression Controls. This little comp has some text on a path, has this hummingbird animated across the screen and an animated background there. And the hummingbird already has the wiggle expression applied to its position and scale. I'll show you that by clicking on hummingbird, pressing EE twice so you can see expressions. And there they are, wiggle for the position and for the scale. And it's also keyframed, so as it goes across the screen, those animations take place. This is something I explained in the previous lesson if you watched the one on the wiggle expression. All right, what I want to do here is I want to animate the text a little bit using the wiggle expression and using expression controls. I also want to control the color here in the background and on the text. So let's get to work, folks, shall we? Let's look over here at the effects and presets and going down here a bit to expression controls. What are expression controls? There's 7 effects here called expression controls. And when people try them, nothing happens. So they kind of go, okay, I don't get it. What are these guys about? But let me just show you an effect. Let's go over here to, let's say, the solid and go to Effect Controls panel and look down here at Hue Saturation. If you look at the colorized hue here, you see that it has this kind of a controller. That's called an angle control. That's the type of controller. It's an angle control, and there is the angle control here. So you use expression controls to build your own custom effects that have these kinds of controls. Right here, you see this is called a slider control, and there's the slider control there. So you create effects that have these kinds of controls, and then you use those controls to control expressions elsewhere on other layers or other properties. So let me take a look at one more here. Go to Fractal Noise. That's called the checkbox control. There's the checkbox control. So again, you build these guys from scratch using these guys. And these guys represent virtually every kind of control you can find in every kind of effect. But here you get a chance to build them from scratch. You can put these expression controls inside layers, but it's a little better to have them in a separate layer where it's easier to manage them. And it would be good if that separate layer could be invisible. So guess what we're going to use here? Right click, go new, and say null object layer. The all-purpose invisible layer. You can even turn off this little box here because we don't need it at all. So just turn off that box if you don't see it at all. And I want to add some effects to the null object layer, some expression controls. I want to add the slider control twice because I'm going to use the slider control to control the wiggle expression. And the wiggle expression has 2 properties to it. The one that talks about frequency and the one that discusses the amount that you change. So 2 controls there to control both of those guys. And I want to put an angle control in here to control the hue for the background and also for the text. So now we have 3 controllers here. So we know what they're going to control. I'm going to click on the first one here and press the Enter key and type in frequency. So we know that's going to control the frequency for the wiggle expression. Click on slider control, press Enter. We'll call this one amount. And for the angle control, click on that, press Enter. We'll call this one hue. All right, let's go on down here and do some work. I want to be able to put expressions on the text and then connect those expressions to these controllers and then put keyframes for these controllers. So go down to Hummingbird here, open that up. I want to control its position, so I'll close effects here. I want to get down to transform and control its position. As it goes across the screen here, I want to kind of bounce it around a little bit when it gets to the center. So I want to add the wiggle expression to position. So I go Alt or Option, click on the toggle animation switch there, type in wiggle, and I'm going to go X, Y. And After Effects isn't going to like that when I press Enter. It's going to say, hey, this is a problem because it's not connected to anything. But that's okay. Now we're going to connect it. I want to connect it to those 2 controllers. So I need to kind of open up some space here so I can see them a little bit. The controllers are inside the null object layer. Under Effects, got frequency and amount. I need to connect the X and Y values directly to the properties here, the 2 sliders. So I go down here a little ways. I've got my position, probably need to pull this up a little bit farther. And I'm going to connect them one at a time. So I need to say the X value. So I highlight the X value by just dragging my cursor across it like that, just to highlight the letter X, not the comma, not the parentheses, just the X. And I need to connect that up here to the proper slider, to the frequencies. So I get my pick whip and drag it up here, and it will scroll to that point. So I'll scroll to slider for frequency. Now that's going to put that whole value, wiggle, this comp, layer, null to effect, frequency. So frequency is the effect and slider is the property. And now there's Y, so I need to highlight Y and take my pick whip to the slider for amount right there. Great, now I press the Enter key and we're done. it's now properly set up. Let me just show you what happens. So when I get this guy in the middle like that, if I take my amount slider and start changing it, you'll see that there's going to be some changes to that guy as it gets toward that place. Let me just start keyframing that. So I'm going to put on keyframes for the frequency and the amount. So right there where we are is a good place to start it. So I keyframe both those guys. I want them both to start at 0. Press 0 there. Now I'm going to go in a ways to the middle of that point where it's settled down there. And we'll change the frequency to something like, let's say, 10 times a second. And change the amount to something like, let's say, I don't know, 50 or something like that. There you go. So when it gets to that point, it's going to bounce around a lot. There it goes. It's going to start bouncing around. At the end here, we'll then calm it down again to 0. So type in 0 for you and 0 for you. And so between those two keyframes, it's going to get pretty animated. Here we go. It's going to get there and bounce around, and then it's going to be done and slide off. There you go. We're using these controllers to control this guy down here, the wiggle expression. Otherwise, the wiggle expression just plays steadily throughout the entire layer, throughout the entire property. Here we get to control it using those expression controllers. Great. Now I want to control the hue here. So we've got the hue down here. Let me go down to text. Text has effects, has a hue saturation in it. If you look at hue, you'll see that it has a channel range. Down below here, I've got colorize on. The default looks like this. And it says master hue there, but notice there's no keyframe there. You can't keyframe master hue. It's just one of those things. It doesn't work. So I need to turn on colorize, and I can keyframe the colorize hue thing. So that'll work fine here. I've got the saturation to 100, so the color is pretty dramatic there. So I'm going to use the angle for this one. So the hue angle control here up inside the null object layer. So I'm going to turn on colorize hue there. I'm going to alt click or option click on that one. And I'm not going to use wiggle this time. I'm just going to drag this to that angle controller up here. So under hue, do need to open this guy up, otherwise it won't work. So let's go for a second. Open up hue. There we go. I'm going to drag it to angle. So let's try that again. Drag it up to get the angle right there. Now the angle control will control the hue of the text. Let's just see if that works. I see how that text is changing there. Put this back to 0. We'll deal with it later. I also want to control the hue of the background. So let's go down here to the background, the solid. It has hue saturation applied to it as well. So I'll alt click on it like so. We'll do the same thing where we drag this thing up to the angle. It'll scroll here when we get there. We'll go to angle. The thing is, I don't want them to be in concert. I don't want them to have the exact same color. So I want to add something to one of them. So I'm going to go here to the text. And at the end here, I'm going to add 90 degrees. So plus 90, which means that it'll be 90 degrees out of sync with the background. So whatever the background is, the text will be different. That's one of the objects here. So we can use one controller to control hue, but we can tell it, no, let's just have this one be 90 degrees off, which is fine. So let's go up here to the controller, turn on keyframes for it at the beginning, click that, set the 0. We'll go to the end, and let's say we're going to rotate hue a couple of times. So I'll go 2 there, that's fine. And now I want to do one more kind of tricky thing. I want to connect the saturation to the amount slider. Now the amount slider was set up just to work with the wiggle expression, but I want to use saturation with that amount slider as well, just as kind of a little gimmick here. So I'm going to go down here a little ways and look at hue saturation. And here the saturation is 100. That's where it's going to stay. Let's go on down a little bit farther here to the solid. Here the saturation starts at 24, and I want to connect that to that other guy, to that amount. So I'm going to alt click on U to turn on the expression. I want to drag U up. There you go. Up to the amount here. It's another connected. I'm going to go back down here, and I want to make sure it starts at 24. So I want to go down here to saturation, go over here to the side like that, and say plus 24 so that it starts with some saturation like that. Press the enter key out there in the numeric keypad. So let's see what happens here. We want that background to start off not too saturated, then kind of work up a bit to get richer in color, to get more saturated, and then kind of fade back down again. Because it's taking the amount from the amount slider and then going back down to something a little bit less saturated at the end. And we're also seeing the little bit of animation there with the hummingbird going across. It's got its own little animation going on there. It's keyframe, but it also has the wiggle expression on it working independently. Then we've got the text kind of bouncing around in the middle. I'll play that a little bit, see how it bounces around like that. And also notice how the saturation in the background gets richer because we're connecting that to the amount up here in the slider that you saw earlier, right up here. So all these guys are working together. We've got a few expression controllers controlling a lot of different things going on inside this particular comp. So that's how you use expression controls effects here inside After Effects.